Polovina 19. století v New Yorku byla dobou rychlého pokroku a velkých ambicí. Právě v tomto období se však pod hlučnými ulicemi města začal odvíjet příběh, který dodnes vyvolává více otázek než odpovědí. Vynálezce Alfred Beach založil akciovou společnost s podmanivým názvem Pneumatic Transit. Tato společnost si stanovila velkolepý cíl – vytvořit síť podzemních tunelů, v nichž by se pneumatické vlaky pohybovaly jako kapsle v trubici. Cestu k uskutečnění této myšlenky však zablokovaly byrokratické překážky a odpor mocných sil.
Alfred Beach presentò una richiesta ufficiale all'amministrazione cittadina per ottenere il permesso di costruire queste arterie di trasporto, ma ricevette un rifiuto categorico. Gli storici discutono ancora oggi le ragioni di questa decisione. Forse si trattò di un forte lobbying da parte dei magnati delle ferrovie, che non volevano tollerare concorrenti nel sottosuolo. Oppure le autorità cittadine temevano davvero che lavori su larga scala potessero causare il crollo di edifici residenziali e storici. Alla fine, all'inventore fu consentito di posare solo tubazioni di piccolo diametro, destinate esclusivamente a un sistema di posta pneumatica. Sembrava che questo audace progetto dovesse finire lì, ma è proprio da qui che inizia la parte più interessante.
Když si Alfred Beach uvědomil, že legální cestou svého cíle nedosáhne, rozhodl se jednat tajně. Vymyslel odvážný plán. Postavit plnohodnotný demonstrační tunel navzdory zákazům, spustit pneumatický vlak a postavit veřejnost před hotovou věc. Výpočet byl jednoduchý. Jakmile obyvatelé uvidí účinnost a bezpečnost nové dopravy, úřady budou muset ustoupit a vydat povolení k rozšíření sítě pod celé město. Roku 1868 si společnost pronajala na 5 let sklep oděvního obchodu Devlin na rušné Broadway. Práce probíhaly v noci, v atmosféře přísného utajení, která připomínala spíše přípravu loupeže století než inženýrský projekt. Oficiálním úřadům i zvědavým kolemjdoucím bylo řečeno, že se buduje jen skromná šachta pro poštovní potrubí. Každou noc odjížděla z budovy kolona vozíků, které odvážely tuny zeminy vytěžené z hlubin Manhattanu. K ražbě se používal speciální štít, který Beach navrhl osobně. A tak po zdánlivě neuvěřitelně krátké době, 26. února 1870, padla rouška tajemství a tunel byl slavnostně otevřen pro veřejnost.
Ciò che i primi visitatori videro li lasciò sbalorditi. I cittadini entravano nel seminterrato anonimo del negozio, attraversavano un vestibolo speciale le cui porte fungevano da camera di compensazione e improvvisamente si ritrovavano in un mondo completamente diverso. Davanti a loro non si apriva una miniera umida e buia, ma una lussuosa stazione sotterranea, il cui arredamento poteva competere con i migliori salotti dell'alta società. La stazione della ferrovia pneumatica era rifinita con legni pregiati, eleganti lampadari pendevano dal soffitto e lo spazio era illuminato dalla luce morbida delle lampade a gas ossi-idrogeno, che all'epoca rappresentavano un vero miracolo tecnologico.
The interior staggered the imagination. There was a real fountain with swimming goldfish and even a grand piano, creating the atmosphere of an elite club. At the far end of the station, the portal of the first American subway could be seen. The entrance to the tunnel was framed by magnificent brickwork and decorated with 2 bronze statues depicting the god Mercury, the patron of travelers and trade. Behind the wall of this luxurious station lay the heart of the system, a 50-ton air compressor with a capacity of 100 horsepower, which drove the car. $350,000 from Alfred Beach's personal savings were spent on the creation of this underground miracle. The length of the finished section was 95 meters, and the diameter of the tube was 2.5 meters. Before we find out where this miracle of technology disappeared to and why they preferred to forget about it, be sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video, because the facts that follow will only be more amazing and will force you to look at familiar history in a new way. It would seem the success was overwhelming. In a year of operation, this single car transported 400,000 passengers eager to touch the future. However, the strangest thing about this story is not the luxury of the interiors or the technical perfection, but the inconsistencies that surface upon a detailed analysis of the construction timeline and the subsequent fate of the object. It is hard to believe that such grandiose work was done so quickly and secretly, and even harder to explain why it so ingloriously vanished into oblivion. If you read the official reports carefully and compare them with the laws of physics and construction logistics, the beautiful story of the genius inventor begins to burst at the seams. Let's turn to simple arithmetic, which casts doubt on the very possibility of implementing such a project within the stated time frame. According to the generally accepted version, the main phase of tunneling took only 58 nights. In this insignificant period of time, workers were supposed to not only extract soil for almost 100 meters under one of the busiest streets in the world, but also perform a whole series of complex engineering operations. We are asked to believe that in less than 2 months, working exclusively under the cover of darkness, Alfred Beech's team managed to remove thousands of cubic meters of earth, erect perfect brickwork for the vaults, complete the full finishing of the station, install decorative elements, and, most incredibly, assemble and tune giant equipment. We are talking about a 50-ton air compressor and massive cast iron structures. Even using modern technologies, possessing powerful tunneling machinery and a 24-hour work schedule, meeting such deadlines would be a task on the verge of fantasy. And in the 19th century, with manual labor and the need to maintain complete secrecy, this looks absolutely impossible. How could one unnoticedly deliver and install a 50-ton unit in a basement without attracting the attention of the entire block? History takes a sharp turn, transporting us to the 20th century. After the financial crash of 1873 and the subsequent closure of the project, the pneumatic subway was indeed forgotten. The entrance was boarded up, and a fire that destroyed the building above at the end of the century finally hid the traces of the station. However, in 1912, when workers were laying a new line for the Broadway subway, they accidentally stumbled upon a brick wall that was not on the plans. Breaking through it, the builders found themselves in that very legendary tunnel. An amazing picture appeared before them. Time here seemed to have stopped. The tunnel was in excellent condition, despite decades of desolation. Inside stood that very tunneling shield, rusty rails went into the darkness, and the pneumatic subway car froze on the tracks, ready for departure. It would seem that the discovery of such a unique object should have become a sensation on a national scale. It was the first subway in the country's history, a monument to engineering thought, a ready-made museum that only needed to be restored and opened to tourists. The city authorities should have been proud of such a heritage. But instead of the triumphant return of history, something strange happened, resembling the intentional destruction of evidence. The unique tunneling shield, which should have taken a place of honor in a technical museum, disappeared without a trace. The car was likely sent for scrap or simply destroyed. No one tried to preserve the station's interiors. Moreover, they even tried to erase the memory of this place. In 1932, the New York Historical Society commissioned a memorial plaque in honor of Alfred Beech, which they planned to install on the City Hall building. However, for inexplicable reasons, the authorities never gave permission for its installation. The plaque gathered dust in warehouses, and the name of the creator of the first subway was diligently met with silence. Such an attitude from the authorities looks suspicious. Usually, the state strives to immortalize the achievements of its citizens, especially when it comes to leadership and technology. Here, we see the opposite picture. complete indifference, bordering on a desire to hide the find. Perhaps the reason lies in the fact that preserving and studying this object was dangerous for the official version of history. After all, if engineers and historians began to study the brickwork and construction methods in detail, they might have come to uncomfortable conclusions. One gets the impression that Alfred Beach did not build this tunnel from scratch in record time at all. It is more logical to assume that he discovered an already existing underground passage left by unknown builders of the past. His construction could have been merely an operation to clean and adapt an ancient structure for his needs. He simply removed the debris, whitewashed the walls, put in furniture, and passed off the ancient communication as his invention. This explains the unrealistic deadlines, the secret nature of the work, and the strange silence of the authorities afterward. And if we accept this thought, it becomes obvious. The New York Tunnel is far from the only one of its kind. Similar oddities are discovered on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. If we assume that the New York Pneumatic Tunnel was not built, but merely restored, then the thread of investigation inevitably leads us across the ocean to the capital of the British Empire. Here, in London, a striking, almost mystical resemblance is discovered between the American project of the late 19th century and blueprints created half a century earlier. We are talking about the works of the famous Marc Isambard Brunel, the man who is officially considered the father of modern tunneling and the creator of the first tunnel under the Thames. If you study Brunel's early sketches stored in British archives in detail, you can notice one strange feature. His project for the tunnel under the River Thames has a very specific cross-sectional shape. It is not just a circle, and not an arch, but a complex geometric figure. A perfect circle with a rectangular platform cut into the lower part. This shape coincides down to the smallest details, right up to the proportions of the brickwork, with what Alfred Beach would present to the public in New York decades later. A natural question arises. How is this possible? Official history will tell us that engineering thought develops in parallel, and similar tasks give birth to similar solutions. But here we encounter a time paradox. Brunel made his sketches in the early 19th century, when no one was yet thinking about a pneumatic subway. And Beach began construction only after the Civil War in the USA. Could the American inventor have seen the Englishman's secret drawings? This is extremely unlikely, as Brunel's early rough sketches were not published in the wide press and remained in personal archives. There is another, bolder explanation for this phenomenon. What if both Marc Brunel and Alfred Beach did not invent the shape of the tunnel, but simply sketched what they saw with their own eyes? Imagine that Brunel, like his American colleague, stumbled upon entrances to an ancient underground system. In that case, his famous drawings are not a flight of fancy, but a report from the site of an inspection of an already existing object. He, like a conscientious engineer, simply documented the shape of an ancient collector or transport artery that had to be cleared of silt and water. This explains why two tunnels, separated by thousands of kilometers and decades of history, look like twins created according to a single standard. The trail of this mysterious underground civilization stretches even further, to the east into the Russian Empire. Few people know that before his triumph in London, Brunel offered his services to the Russian Emperor Alexander I. In 1814, a grandiose project to build a crossing over the Neva in St. Petersburg was discussed. Initially, it was specifically about a tunnel, and Brunel was ready to implement it. However, at the last moment, this idea was abandoned in favor of a bridge. Historians speak of technical difficulties, but perhaps the reason was different. The engineers simply could not pump the water out of the found ancient communications, or considered the restoration too dangerous. To this day, persistent rumors circulate among residents of St. Petersburg and urban explorers about the existence of a giant underground passage connecting Kronstadt with the mainland and running under the bottom of the Gulf of Finland. They say that this facility is now used by the military and is closed to prying eyes. If we manage to look at its cross-section, it would not be surprising if it turned out to be the same shape, a circle with a rectangular base. Similar structures are also found in Canada, where the oldest tunnel in Brockville, now used as a sewer, has identical architecture. All this leads to the thought of the existence of a single world standard of ancient builders. It is as if once, long before the era of steam and electricity, the planet was entangled in a network of unified underground highways. New York, London, St. Petersburg, Canadian cities. Everywhere we see the same engineering handwriting, the same masonry technology, the same dimensions. The builders of the 19th century, whom we are used to considering pioneers of industrialization, essentially acted as archaeologists. Some, like in New York and London, were luckier. They got dry and almost intact sections where even remnants of equipment were preserved, which were then passed off as their inventions. Others had a harder time. But if in America and England the tunnels were found practically ready for operation, then in continental Europe, evidence of a completely different kind has been preserved. There, the process of building the subway looked not like laying new tracks, but like a massive archaeological excavation. To see this with our own eyes and understand exactly how ancient arteries were brought back to life, we need to transport ourselves to Paris at the beginning of the 20th century. Paris, the city of lights and romance, keeps beneath its pavements proofs of a completely different kind. Evidence that, if read correctly, is capable of shattering the familiar picture of the world. If in New York and London tunnels were often found already clean and ready for use, then in the capital of France, the process of creating the Metropolitan turned into a massive archaeological operation, which was only called construction by mistake. Archives have preserved hundreds of photographs from the beginning of the 20th century, and these black and white frames tell a story not of laying new tracks, but of excavating an ancient, forgotten city. Peering into the details of these historical chronicles, one can notice the same recurring anomaly. Many photographs capture huge pits gaping in the middle of Parisian streets, but instead of seeing formwork for pouring concrete, or the process of erecting walls from scratch, we observe workers with pickaxes and shovels, simply clearing packed soil from already finished stone vaults. There is a whole series of shots where a double tunnel is clearly visible. The left part of it is already cleared and yawns with the blackness of a passage, while the right is still packed with earth and clay up to the very ceiling. This site defies logical explanation from the point of view of classical construction. Why would engineers first build a complex double arch, then bury it with earth, only to heroically dig it out again later? The answer suggests itself. No one built these vaults in the 19th century. They were already there, hidden under the weight of centuries, waiting for the moment when a new civilization would stumble upon them. This technological dissonance manifests itself particularly vividly when looking at the work methods. We see primitive wooden scaffolding, rough props made of untreated logs, hand tools, and horse-drawn carts. And this entire arsenal of artisanal production is used to create perfect stone masonry, the quality of which surpasses many modern standards. The tunnel walls are made of magnificently fitted blocks, resembling ancient Roman architecture or Cyclopean structures of antiquity. The contrast between the wretchedness of the scaffolding and the grandeur of the walls themselves simply screams that these people could not be the authors of these structures. They look like ants swarming in the ruins of a giant's temple, trying to adapt it to their modest needs. In some sections of the Parisian works, it is clearly visible how ancient masonry is barbarically smashed to widen a passage or connect different levels. Workers dismantle ancient walls, and the cross-sections show how deep and solid they were made. This is not brick facing of the Victorian era. This is a monolithic construction calculated for millennia. Moreover, in the cutaways of the earth, the outlines of not one or two, but 4 parallel tunnels going into the unknown appear at once. Why did Paris at the beginning of the last century need such an excessive underground network, if even today many of these passages are not used? Obviously, we are dealing with the remnants of a global civilization's transport system, the scale of which we are only beginning to realize. Official engineering plans of that time look like works of art. Complex blueprints, precise calculations, beautiful diagrams. But the reality in the photographs differs strikingly from the paper. On paper, there is the triumph of progress. In the pit, the heavy labor of diggers clearing rubble. This suggests that the so-called subway projects were not plans for creation, but maps for reconnaissance. Engineers did not design stations. They put on paper what they managed to find with ground-penetrating radar or accidental soil collapses. The shape of the small channels discovered in Paris surprisingly coincides with the shape of the tunnels in New York. The same circle with a rectangular base. This confirms the hypothesis of a single world standard applied long before the appearance of modern states. Instead of admitting that humanity lives on the ruins of a more developed past, historians preferred to call this the Industrial Revolution, and attribute the merits of ancient architects to modern contractors. In Paris, as in other capitals of the world, the subway was simply fitted into existing voids. Somewhere they patched up the vaults, somewhere they punched new passages, but the foundation remained the same, ancient. However, the most convincing proof that we are dealing not with progress, but with adaptation, is not even the quality of the walls, but what exactly was launched through these magnificent tunnels. The final nail in the coffin of the official version of history is driven by the obvious degradation of technologies, which is impossible to hide. The final nail in the coffin of the official version of history is driven by the obvious degradation of technologies, which is impossible to hide if we compare two landmark events separated by a short period of time. Let's transport ourselves to 1904, when the widely advertised official opening of the New York subway took place. Newspapers trumpeted the triumph of progress. Crowds of people rejoiced. But what exactly were they shown? Mayor McClellan personally drove the first train, and it was not a futuristic capsule train, but, in essence, a wretched open-air handcar looking more like a mining cart or a construction trolley to which an electric drive was hastily attached. Passengers sat on hard benches, blown by drafts, in a crude utilitarian vehicle. And now, let's rewind time back to 1870, more than 30 years earlier. Alfred Beach demonstrates his pneumatic car. A hermetic capsule, soft seats, exquisite finish, smooth ride, absence of noise and soot. How is this possible? According to the laws of civilization development, technologies should become more complex and improve. But here we see the reverse process. From complex pneumatics and comfort to primitive carts on rails. It is the same as transferring from a modern high-speed express to a steam wagon. In the half-century that is considered the golden age of the Industrial Revolution, transport did not evolve but degraded to the level of the simplest mechanisms. This glaring paradox has only one logical explanation that ties together all the oddities. The incredible speed of construction, the identity of tunnels around the world, and the disappeared equipment. We are observing not the evolution of 19th century engineering thought, but the process of clumsy adaptation of the ruins of a highly developed civilization that existed long before us. Humanity of that era did not build these grandiose underground networks. It found them. We arrived at something ready-made, like new tenants in an old, abandoned, but majestic castle. New York and London were luckier in this sense than other cities. In their sectors of the underground web, not only the tunnels themselves were preserved, but also remnants of ancient mechanisms, those very pneumatic systems and compressors that Beach and Brunel were able to clean, start, and pass off as their inventions. That is why their projects looked so futuristic for their time. However, since they did not fully understand the operating principles of this technology and could not maintain or reproduce it, these inventions quickly broke down, and they preferred to forget about them, replacing them with primitive but understandable electric trains. In other places, such as Paris or many sections of that same New York, researchers stumbled only upon empty pipes, giant stone corridors filled with silt and mud after an unknown cataclysm. They only had to shovel out tons of earth, lay their primitive rails, and declare it the great construction of the century. The entire world subway system is not an achievement of 19th century engineers, but a secondary use of a colossal ancient transport network that once entangled the entire planet with a single standard. We use only pitiful scraps of former greatness, not even suspecting who and when actually laid these tracks beneath our feet. If this video made you think about how little we know about the real past of our civilization, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And right now, 2 videos have appeared on the screen that will even more strongly overturn your view of real history and show other traces of a forgotten era. Do not miss them.